you making a pass at me, Mrs. Blaylock?
Miriam. Miriam? Not that I'm aware of, Sarah.
Oh, no.
There's a moment in The Hunger that still stuns audiences 40 years later. A slow, sultry kiss between two Hollywood icons, Susan Sarandon and Catherine Deneuve, shot in moody lighting, scored with ethereal music, and dripping with forbidden tension. It's been celebrated, analyzed, and immortalized. But here's the twist. That very scene, the one that turned a stylish vampire flick into a lightning rod of controversy, nearly ended in real gunfire. Right in the middle of filming, on the floor of a Brooklyn garage, the scene came to a screeching halt when a man pulled a gun on the crew and threatened to shut the whole thing down. And you won't believe how the director responded. We'll get into the full madness of that shootout in a bit. But first, let's talk about how The Hunger went from an obscure Gothic novel to a sleek, sensual, and surreal cult classic. One that defied genre, confused critics, and left behind a legacy that still pulses through vampire cinema today. Released in 1983, The Hunger was the directorial debut of Tony Scott. Yes, Top Gun Tony Scott, who, at the time, was known mostly for stylish commercials and had never made a feature film. In fact, The Hunger was a major leap of faith. Producer Richard Shepard originally wanted Alan Parker to direct, but Parker passed the project to Tony after seeing his work. Even Ridley Scott was briefly attached, but bailed when he heard David Bowie had signed on. The source material was Whitley Strieber's 1981 novel, which tackled immortality through a dark and sensual lens. Screenwriters Ivan Davis and Michael Thomas loosely adapted it, layering in eroticism, classical music, and a sense of high-fashion dread. The result? A vampire film that looked like nothing else. It opens with a bang, or rather, a pulse. The post-punk band Bauhaus performs Bela Lugosi's Dead in a smoky nightclub as Miriam and John Blaylock, our undead power couple, prowl for victims. Played by Catherine Deneuve and David Bowie, they are impossibly chic, cool as ice, and totally lethal. They lure in a young couple, seduce them, and dispatch them with tiny blade-tipped Ankh pendants. But unlike your usual vampire story, The Hunger doesn't hinge on blood or fangs or garlic. It hinges on decay, of relationships, of bodies, of illusions. John, turned by Miriam centuries ago, suddenly begins aging at a terrifying rate. In desperation, he seeks help from Dr. Sarah Roberts, a gerontologist played by Susan Sarandon. She brushes him off at first, until he reappears hours later, wrinkled and graying. As John fades, Miriam turns her attention to Sarah. What follows is a slow burn seduction that culminates in one of the most infamous love scenes of the 80s. But behind the eroticism was tension, both creative and logistical. The original version of the scene had Miriam drugging Sarah. Sarandon wasn't having it. If Catherine Deneuve can't seduce a woman without drugs, what hope do the rest of us have? She famously said. The script was changed, making the scene about desire, not manipulation. And it worked. The chemistry between Deneuve and Sarandon was so real, it leapt off the screen and continued off camera. Sarandon later revealed that during filming, she had a brief but intense affair with David Bowie. Meanwhile, cameraman Hugh Johnson fell in love with Catherine Deneuve and lived with her for 2 years after filming. What was it about this set? Even the wardrobe had a life of its own. Costume designer Milena Canonero once vanished for a full day. The crew was panicking until they learned she'd flown to Rome on her own dime to find the perfect fabric for a handkerchief Bowie was supposed to wear. Talk about commitment. Speaking of Bowie, his performance is oddly touching. Despite being a rock legend, he delivers a deeply human portrayal of John, vulnerable, desperate, and slowly unraveling. He learned to play the cello just for this role, and even screamed punk songs off the George Washington Bridge at night to achieve the perfect raspy voice for his aged character. If that's not method, what is? And then there's the makeup. John's transformation from youthful vampire to frail old man was crafted by legendary artist Dick Smith, famed for his work on The Exorcist. The result is haunting. Watching Bowie's face collapse under the weight of time, you can feel the horror of a body rebelling against the promise of eternity. Which brings us back to Sarah. As she's pulled deeper into Miriam's world, her own biology begins to change. Her blood mutates, her cravings intensify, and then comes that scene, the kiss, the seduction, the drink. It was a moment that audiences never forgot, and behind the camera, it almost ended in disaster. By the time they needed close-up shots to finish the love scene, the budget was nearly gone. So the production scrambled together a shoot at a Brooklyn gas station garage. There, on the floor, Catherine and Susan were reshooting intimate takes when suddenly the man who owned the space stormed in, armed and angry. He wanted more money, right then. No negotiations. The doors flew open. Lights were shut off. Sarandon, still on the ground mid-scene, was stunned. "All I knew," she said, "was that suddenly everything changed. And then, in a moment straight out of an action movie, Tony Scott charged the man. Cameras were snatched, crew members scattered. According to Sarandon, Scott went straight into fisticuffs. The crew got out safely, but most of the footage was unusable. The final scene we see in the film, pieced together from earlier takes and some discrete body doubles. But even without the full footage, the scene struck a nerve. It was groundbreaking, not just for its sensuality, but for its subtext. Two women, both powerful, both seeking control, both changed forever by the encounter. It wasn't about titillation, it was about transformation. And that's the real heart of The Hunger. In a last-minute studio twist tacked on to leave room for sequels, Sarah survives. In the final scene, she's seen in London with two new companions, beautiful and undead. The scene contradicts everything the story had built. Sarandon hated it. "What was the point of fighting the addiction?" she asked, "if I just gave in anyway?" No sequel ever came. But the legacy lived on. The Hunger became a cult classic, especially in goth circles, where its aesthetic was gospel. It inspired shows like American Horror Story and films like Blade. It even spawned a short-lived TV series in the 90s hosted by Bowie himself. So what is The Hunger really about? The need to be loved, the terror of being alone, the seductive pull of forever, and the cost of chasing it. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you think is the true meaning of The Hunger? Was Sarah's transformation a tragedy or an evolution? And do you think that legendary love scene holds up today? Drop your thoughts below. We're dying to hear them.